Hi everyone, good evening. Hope you've all had a very, very good day. It's nice having you with us this evening as we celebrate excellence in planning. Just as a teaser, Ransford was one of the very first Black planning manager that I met when I started my career. I'm not going to say much, but that tells you a lot. This was in the late 90s, early 20s. So that tells you that it did make great strides in the career or in the profession. So tonight we'll be having a conversation with Ransford Stewart. He's a member of the Royal Town Planning Institute, and he'll be talking on optimizing opportunities to grow. And I do promise you to be a worthwhile session. You won't regret giving up an hour and a half of your time this evening to attend this event. The agenda is not a very long one, and it will be posted on the chat room now by Pan. Following my welcome and introduction, I'll be handing over to Sara, and she will then introduce Ransford, ask Ransford some questions, and Ransford is going to give us a presentation looking back on his career and looking at the opportunities it took to grow. And after that, we will then have a question and answer session. We did ask all attendees to submit their questions, and thank you to everyone who did contribute. We got nearly 30 questions. We may not be able to go through everything. So if your question is not answered, we will definitely come back to you. Following that Q&A, we will then have an open mic session. So we would encourage everyone to just contribute, maybe something that we got from the session. We would encourage you to just reflect back on what you've heard, what you are going to take back, or if there's something that you feel you can contribute to the discussion. So, but important thing is still keeping it within the theme. So we don't want to then digress or go into other sessions or other topics. We would have another opportunity in the future to just have a very, very real open mic where you can talk about anything. But for this evening, let's keep it focused on the topic, which is optimizing opportunities to grow. And then we'll then have a closing remark from myself. And after that, a networking, people can stay back, introduce yourself. If there is a question you want to ask anyone, there's something you need, just put it out there. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the host for tonight. She's going to be putting all the questions that every single person I've wanted to ask Ransford. And her name is Sara Dilmamode. Sara is the Director of Cities Mode Planning, an award-winning specialist. Hi, Sara. If you could make yourself visible so people can see you. Hi, Sara. And so,
hi, Helen.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for joining us this evening. And Sara is also part of the steering group, and so she will be doing the interviewing. I don't know if she's going to be as tough as those interviewers have been with Trump. She may not be, but who knows? She may have one or two things up her sleeve. So Ransford, watch out. Yeah, and
be
Sara
gentle with me.
Yes, so she may just ask you those big questions. Maybe not about COVID and whether I believe that there is COVID. So, as I was saying, please, can everyone switch off their mic, please? Thank you. Switch off your mic, please. So, as I was saying about our host and interviewer, and that is Sara Dilmamode. She's the Director of Cities Mode Planning, an award-winning specialist independent planning consultancy. She's a chartered town planner and an elected member on the RTPI's General Assembly. Sara works on projects supporting planning authorities to deliver local plans and associated evidence, community infrastructure levy, and other strategic planning documents. Sara is also involved in delivering best practice research for MHCLG and the Local Government Association. Before working at Cities-Mode Planning, Sara spent more than 10 years working in local government and private sector planning roles. So please join me in welcoming Sara to take the seat and to interview and, of course, put all those questions to our guests. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Helen. Thanks for such a kind introduction. But tonight, we really want to talk about Ransford. So I've recently joined the steering group, as Helen mentioned, and I hadn't met Ransford before, but I have worked in local government for quite a while, both directly for local government and in the private sector on public sector projects. And I'd always heard rumours of Ransford, people saying how terrific he was at different points in time. So I was absolutely delighted that I got to meet him and work with him on this steering group, and that I'm getting to interview him tonight. I don't think I will be as tough as the kind of interviews that we've seen over the pond, Helen, but I won't tolerate any talk of fake news or anything like that, Ransford. So, but Ransford is Director of Stewart Management and Planning. He's got a tremendously impressive CV, which I won't dwell on too much because he's going to talk us through a lot of those experiences. Formerly Head of Planning and Transportation at Watford Council. He's been in a range of senior roles across London local authorities, and he's also an independent consultant and associate to KPMG. I'm going to invite Ransford to talk a bit more about some of the challenges and the successes that he's found, reflecting on a long and successful career, I would say, in planning. But perhaps before we kick off, Ransford, for those in the audience who perhaps don't know you, can you tell us where you're from? Where did you grow up?
Where did I grow up? Is everybody able to hear me? First of all, yes? Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I grew up in Birmingham in the 1960s, I mean, Birmingham back then was quite an exciting place to be. I think in a lot of respects, there's a lot of stuff going on, I was part of a first generation immigrant community. My parents came over in the 1950s, late 1950s from Jamaica. And we settled in a part of Birmingham where there were lots of families like us, but also families from other parts of the world, from, lots of Irish, lots of Lithuanians, people from the Arab countries, and from all over the world. It was a really mixed and vibrant community. I had some great times. I would go on. Could I just say it as a result of the area that I grew up in and all the stuff that was going around me? I think that's where my interest in planning really kicked off. Seeing all those highway schemes and the tower blocks, new schools, the everything that was happening at that time all at once was really quite impressive, inspirational, and in some respects quite troubling as well. Because as part of that sort of march of progress, if you like, we lost our house, and we were moved out of the area to a different part of Birmingham. That community that we were part of was broken up, and I think that was also part of my interest in planning, because it started me asking questions to myself and others. Why did that happen? So that's me, I guess, in a nutshell, and sort of a slightly probing and awkward person, asking questions all the time, really.
So you're a youngster growing up in Birmingham, a massive period of change for that city and for your community. So that piqued your interest, if you like, in urban issues, in planning generally. But what was it that took you to planning as a career? How did you even discover it?
Well, it was a bit fortuitous, actually. I was looking for something that kind of play to all of those things, and I think I was probably attracted to architecture to start with, but then I thought, well, actually that was relatively narrow in terms of what I understood of architecture. And my sister, who's a couple of years older than me and may even been on this conference evening, she has brought home from school a little booklet that had all these different careers and everything in there. And I was kind of thumbing through it, and at the back of it, I saw this thing called town planning. I thought, well, that sounds good. When I sort of went to the page on town planning, it said see urban planning. So I went to urban planning. That then said see architecture. And it was taking me around this loop, and nothing actually told me anything about what town planning was. But fortunately, about that time, Aston University were running a course, and I went to one of their open days, and two of their professors there actually spent gave up me a lot of their time to explain what it was all about and how to get into it.
Oh, great.
Just a reminder to just mute yourselves for the audience. Just switch yourself onto mute. So you're at Aston University. Yes, for their open day.
Yeah, so that's where I really understood what I had it explained to me what planning was about, and I thought, yeah, this is something I could really do. But when I went to the proper careers fair at our school, and we had careers advisors come in to tell us, sort of give us advice and find out what it was we were wanted to do. I had a really sort of strange conversation where I was talking about planning. And this career advisor was telling me about, well, you're not really doing the right sort of subjects. You need to do lots of sciences, and and you need to expect to be that you'll probably have to be a doctor before you can do planning. And I thought, I don't know what this guy's talking about. And it took a while, and then it suddenly dawned on me he was talking about family planning, not town planning at all. So we had a bit of a sort of giggle about that, and. But it turned out he didn't know anything about town planning either, but he was quite sort of understanding that I'd spent a lot of time working it out for myself, and sort of just said, yeah, go for it. But yeah, I could very well have become a family planner if I hadn't been.
Excellent. So this evening we're talking about sort of 30 years on from that, really, and your career and how you've optimized and perhaps created those opportunities for growth. I just want to sort of invite you really to give you a bit of space to tell us about some of those experiences from your early career experiences, but tell us about those projects that really presented those opportunities. We'd really like to sort of bury into them. I've seen a whole list of questions, as I said, that's been sort of channeled around what were those big challenges, what were those successes, and how are you navigating the kind of spaces that you were in within these organisations and within the places that you work. So I'm gonna I've got loads of questions later, Ransford, but I'm gonna be quiet for a moment and hand the floor to you.
Right. Thanks for that, Sarah. When Helen asked me to do this, I was actually all set to say no, because I'm never too keen on talking about myself, and I don't really think of myself as being anything special. I'm just a jobbing planner. But then she shared with me a little anecdote about a conversation that we'd had many years ago when we were working together at Watford, and how she found it really helpful. It's something that long since sort of receded in my memory, but it reminded me that how I'd been helped by small conversations over the years that strongly resonate with me even now. I'm very mindful. We live in extraordinary times now, and somebody said to me the other day, COVID is something where the breath of a stranger can kill you. And I think, well, just imagine that. We got black lives being snuffed out by police in America in front of our eyes. And here in the UK, you've got members of parliament and British athletes subjected to racial profiling by the police, again, in front of our eyes. In this Black History Month, where our commemoration has to take different forms because of COVID, it seems more important than ever that we share our experiences, support each other, and cherish our networks. For me, that chimes perfectly with what the BAME Planners Network is all about, and that's why I'm here tonight. I've had a long career in planning, and I've seen a lot of change. I've had some successes, but I've also got some things very wrong. And I hope that in this short talk about my life in planning, you'll find something of interest to you, maybe something useful or something you can do. If you don't, you can always blame Helen, because she put me up to it. So my first observation, when choosing your employer, do your own research. Don't follow what other people say. Also, don't be put off by organizations that have problems. One thing that I've learned is that trying circumstances will still do some things really well and have something to teach you if you're prepared to learn. Also, the opposite is true. The best organizations are rarely good at everything. I started working in Hackney in 1984, and everybody that I knew back then told me not to go to Hackney. They were saying it's chaotic, this council's skint, it's a loony left council, it's a depressed area. People have all sorts of views about employers and workplaces, often based on old, partial, or inaccurate information. So I'd ask you to do your own research, base your decisions on your own findings. In fairness, Hackney was actually all of those things that I was warned about, but somehow, when it's combined with a real can-do attitude, vibrant and diverse communities and workforce, it was actually a really good place to be. I joined Hackney at a more senior level than I had any right to expect, given my complete lack of planning knowledge. And I remember how I felt completely exposed and expected at any time someone might tap me on the shoulder and say, "You don't know what you're doing, get out of here." We call it imposter syndrome now, although in my case, I genuinely didn't know anything about planning. I was paired with a principal officer, shown around the office, given a copy of the advert regs, the DC manual, and left to get on with it. No local plan, you notice, because Hackney didn't have one. I read those documents cover to cover over and over again. Then the cases started arriving, the correspondence, the phone calls, and all the other stuff of a busy inner city planning service, and I was off and running. Yes, I was faking it at first, but I was learning quickly, asking questions and seeking advice from anyone and everyone prepared to give it. I made a nuisance of myself and I was difficult to ignore. From those of you just starting in the profession, I'd urge you all to do the same. The best way to learn the art and science of planning is by asking questions to more senior colleagues. This is the point in your career when you will have the time and the space to do it, and colleagues will be the most inclined to help you. Hackney was a big and growing planning department in those days, and I was surrounded by some great planning professionals who've gone on to do great things in academia, Whitehall, Homes England, and other great institutions. I exploited that opportunity, not through any cynical motivations. I just wanted to be the best planner I could be so that no one could tap me on the shoulder and say, "You don't know what you're doing, get out of here." On the face of things, the planning teams at Hackney were really multicultural and representative of the area. But when you look more closely, the BAME staff were concentrated in the admin and support teams, while the planners were predominantly male, white, and middle class. Hackney had a host of selection, interview, recruitment, and training initiatives to enable equal access to employment. And these initiatives were driven by a group of service-based equality advisors who helped to spread good practice. I'm not going to say that those policies and approaches were wholly successful, but in my 6 years at Hackney, the complexion of the workforce changed significantly in front of my eyes. I was the only black planner when I joined, but others joined shortly after me. One, a highly experienced principal officer, and he was my role model. After 3 years, I had an internal promotion and was replaced by a BAME woman planner. I joined 2 BAME planners in my new team, and we also had 4 path trainees. It made me realize that monocultural services are not a given. They can be made more representative. The equality advisor in our service was a black woman who was a non-practicing planner, and she took a particular interest in me and my career. She was a great source of advice and inspiration, and it was her that recommended me for a pre-management training course. And it was that program that made me think for the first time that maybe I could be a manager. And I'll always be grateful to her for the support and guidance that she gave me. Up until that point, I'd always wanted to get on, but I was really unfocused about what it was I was aiming for and why. We can all benefit from mentors, sponsors, and some form of patronage. And I'm not just talking about expensive consultants in plush city offices. Sometimes it's just someone that takes an interest in you, offers some friendly advice, helps you clarify your thoughts, and points you in the right direction. I was lucky because that person found me. So my advice to anyone wanting to advance in their career is, if that person hasn't found you, you need to go out and find that person yourself. Use this network. It's full of people with wide experience, happy to help and guide in whatever way you need. My mentor also made me realize that if I wanted to be a manager, I'd have to leave Hackney and probably London, as there were few roles to move up into, and the holders of those roles weren't really going anywhere soon. I'd had a great time at Hackney. There was always a busy and interesting DC caseload. I worked with housing and environmental health on private sector housing, architects and engineers on the environmental urban programme, finance, valuers and legal on the economic urban programme. I gained skills in design, project and programme management, financial management and working in teams, all of which have stood me in great stead to take advantage of the opportunities that later came my way. So to all those just starting in their planning careers, I would advise you all to think carefully about the core skills that you will need for the long term. I know there's been a few questions on that. Planning is a great, broad and deep profession, but if you're not careful, you can get pigeonholed into a small area. There's nothing wrong with that if that's where you want to be, but to maximize your opportunities for growth, try to get exposure to as many areas as possible. In February 1989, I started working in Watford. And when I arrived, I found a really old school council that felt about 20 years behind the curve. There was no delegation to officers. So every 3 weeks, there was a planning committee where me and the other team leader had to present every planning application for decision. The team was desperately short on staff and experience, and I had the steepest learning curve you can imagine, clearing away a huge backlog of cases, doing planning committee for the first time, coaching more junior officers, all while getting used to a new area, a new council, and new ways of doing things. The first 2 years were tough. There were some toxic relationships at officer level, planning committees were like a bear pit, and there was little interest in modernisation. Fortunately, a new chief executive was appointed with modernisation agenda, and he started making changes straight away. A proper HR and training team was established, gender and race equality advisors were appointed, new appointees were coming up from leading London boroughs, and we started talking about corporate visions, transformation, prioritisation, equality. A couple of months later, a council-wide restructure was up and running, backed up by a cultural change programme and new ways of working, customer care and management training. A Black employees network was set up for the increasing numbers of bank employees in the organisation. We supported each other and challenged the organisation to do better, remove obstacles and treat staff fairly. Twice I found myself giving evidence in support of BAME staff at the Employment Tribunal. It was an exciting time for me, but it was a difficult time for others. There were many who'd become used to a single, unchanging way of doing things, and like frogs in a kettle, they couldn't see they were in the wrong place at the wrong time until it was too late. That leads me to my next observation. Change is a constant in planning and in organisations, and the pace of change can sometimes find us flat-footed. So keep scanning the horizon, anticipate change, adapt or move on. However, it's advice that I then failed to follow myself. Although the years between 1994 and 1998 saw me dealing with proposals for out-of-centre retail parks, football stadiums, residential estate developments of up to 400 units, 2 mosques, multiple office blocks, significant town extensions, and I rose through the ranks from team leader to development control manager, and then in 1998, I was made head of planning and transportation and a member of the corporate management team. I gained a raft of experience in highways and parking schemes, transport planning and green travel options. I got training for my roles and I secured a management qualification. And there's another tip here. For all of those aspiring to management, get yourself a management qualification. It's good for your personal development and it helps you to stand out in a crowded marketplace. For me, it helped to appreciate how important people are to good service delivery, and that leadership is all about developing your people to be the best that they can be. And I take great satisfaction where this has worked out for my staff. But it's not just about identifying and supporting talent. It's mostly about the small conversations, being there for someone after a tricky committee, spotting when someone is starting to be overwhelmed, showing gratitude for the work that people do, and encouraging people to tell you about their career aspirations outside of the JE process. But the organisation I was working for would change around me, and I hadn't noticed. I was no longer the right person in the right place at the right time. There was a fashion for flatter structures, and with huge cuts hitting local government once again, some management levels were obviously not going to survive. So fast forward about 18 months and I was told my post was being made redundant. If I'm honest, it was a bit of a relief. I've been unhappy in the post for a while, and I thought I wanted to progress my career in a larger London council. But when I went through a 3-day recruitment process at one of them, I withdrew just before the final interview, and I'd started questioning if that was what I really wanted. Mentally, I was just stuck. I discussed my situation with the departmental personnel manager, and she helped me with a plan to go forward. She also wrote me a personal letter full of hope and encouragement, friendship and support, recognition of value, and an encouragement to me to recognize my own value. There was also a personal commitment to help. It was a lifeline I needed. Redundancy, when it came, gave me time to think. It also allowed me to get some professional help. I mentioned personal value before, and here's another observation. Local government doesn't encourage you to recognize your value in monetary or any other terms. But feeling undervalued and looking to others for validation can be harmful to your mental health. I can't overemphasize how important good mental health is to all of us. Please, please don't take your mental health for granted. I engaged an executive counsellor who started me on a process of understanding myself and my personal value with a view to getting back into work. But then the phone started ringing. The word was out that I was no longer working for Watford and other people wanted me working for them. Having been rejected by one organisation, I found myself in demand by others, and that was a really strange feeling. Anyway, I did a 4-month interim assignment with a neighbouring council, almost as a favour to a colleague, and started to feel good about myself and planning again. When the assignment was over, I restarted my sessions with the executive counsellor, and it was him that planted the idea of interim management as a viable career option. At that point, I'd only ever come across one interim manager in 16 years of local government, so I was sceptical. We did all sorts of attitude and aptitude tests. We examined the market, and though I was still sceptical, it looked more and more like this was something that I should at least consider. 16 years on, I think it's the best thing I ever did. I've been fortunate to be involved in some fantastic projects during my time as an interim manager and planning consultant. I've led regeneration programs in Haringey, including the new Spurs Stadium, which I have to say is quite stunning, way better than how I'd imagined it turning out. I've advised on the Thames Gateway Deepwater Shipping Terminal and Logistic Park development. I also advise on resourcing for local plan examinations, use of IT planning, control, the regeneration of Lewes Court, Crown Court. The list goes on and on. I've worked for 13 councils, 2 quangos, a national park, and 2 of the big 4 accounting firms. But I don't want to big myself up over any of these, as they're all relied on teams of colleagues of exceptional ability, tenacity, and energy. They're the ones that stayed the course and have seen those projects through. As an interim, there's a brief period when these projects pass through your hands and you get the privilege of sharing their experience and maybe even shape it a bit. Working as an interim has taught me that each organisation has its own way of doing things. So when you walk in on day one, everybody you meet in that organisation knows more about getting things done in it than you do. The trick is to access that fund of knowledge as quickly as possible and then apply your own knowledge and experience to it to deliver the brief and help your staff to be the best that they can be. I do that by talking and listening to people, wherever they are in the organisation. They all have something to tell you if you're prepared to listen, and you may just learn something. Interim management has taken me to parts of the country I would never imagine myself going. The rural home counties and the South Downs National Park, for instance. In many of these places, I can still find that I'm the only black person in the service, the organisation, or even in the town. And yes, it's surprising, but remember, that was almost the norm when I first started in the profession. Fortunately, now I only have to deal with it for a short period. And I only have to deal with it for a short period. The challenges that come from being the first, is making sure that you're not the last. I try hard to set and achieve a high standard to meet and exceed the brief. As BAME employees, I believe that we're held to a higher standard and we have to hold the door open for those who have to follow us. An interim manager of many years standing once told me that you should aim to leave the assignment no worse than you found it. Whilst I'm sure that many employers will be happy to accept that, I always try to leave it better than I found it in at least one respect. I always make a point of reaching out to the BAME members of staff. Their experience gives you real insight in the workings of the organisation, and we'll often talk about different strategies for surviving and thriving at work. The real shame, though, is that too often I'm told by BAME staff that their manager has never spoken to them on a personal level. Any managers or prospective managers out there, please talk to your staff. It costs nothing and it pays hugely in terms of leadership, engagement and loyalty. Finally, I feel that I'm a lucky man. I've had a career, it's been long, and it's had its ups and downs, but good people have always been prepared to help, guide and support me when I've needed it. Those people are out there for all of us. They're waiting for your call. Use them. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Ransford. That was incredibly interesting, and just a really interesting look at some of those highs. But also, thank you for sharing some of those lower points and those challenging points along the way, because there is as much, if not more, learning there. So we're talking about a period from the early 80s until now. Sorry, Ransford, not intending to push that too much. That's a kind of a tremendous period to look back over. What's some of the biggest changes that you've seen?
Oh gosh, I think I'm going to say the first thing is computerization, because I started in planning and there were no computer. No, I'll tell a lie. We used to have a process at Hackney where we had access to a computer that NASA rang, and you were only able to use it between certain hours when basically they weren't using it and they had spare capacity. It was a really weird setup, but it didn't really contribute to the planning process as far as I could see. But like desktop computers and things that we take for granted now just weren't around, and I think that's been a real opportunity. And I think it's really changed the way that we do this job of planning. Representation in planning, it was most unusual to see another BAME planner when I first started. I remember going to a conference in Croydon in my first year, and BAME planners from all over London had been invited. There were probably about 15 of us in the room. And as I say, even now, when you go to places outside of the big cities, it's unusual to find a BAME planner. So you can imagine what it was like then. I think it's great that we've had that change, because a planning profession needs to be reflective of the people that it serves. My concern, though, is that there are two aspects. We've got to get in there, but we've also got to get on. And I feel that the getting on bit is still a work in progress, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah. So in terms of that change, we've talked about sort of that one computer, and now we're sat looking at a white paper which is talking about digitisation of the whole planning system. And you have seen that, as you shared, like right at the beginning, you started to see the beginnings of that in the 80s at Hackney. You described of a more diverse workforce emerging, and some change, but perhaps not enough given that period. Just one of the questions that came up from one of our audience members was around, do you think the future is brighter now for BAME professionals entering the profession? Is it easier sort of breaking through that glass ceiling?
It's a tough one, that one. I must admit, I struggle with it, because I think there are aspects of it, some things that are better, some things that I think are actually more difficult. I feel that, I mean, what's better is, again, is that there are more of us in the profession, and we're able to reach out and provide support to each other. I think this network has got a real potential for being able to spread the knowledge about opportunities for breaking through, because one of the things that my career has told me is that you have to assume that you may well have to move in order to break through. Being in an organization is great for being able to identify that ceiling, but actually the opportunity for you to be able to do that within a reasonable time period may not work for you. You may be better going somewhere else. There may be opportunities that are better, more easily realized and more quickly realized. And I think that's something that perhaps we just need to all bear in mind. I think what's been encouraging, particularly since the launch of the network, is that we're having those conversations with the RTPI, with the Planning Officers Society, and with individual planning services. And I see that as being a really encouraging sign that we'll be able to maybe start attacking that glass ceiling in a different way. Because it's not just about us bashing at it all the time. It's also about people recognizing that those people who are, if you like, custodians of the glass ceiling, recognizing that actually it's not helpful. It's not helpful to delivering the planning service that we ought to be delivering for our residents, for all the users of the service, and for the non-users of the service, because we all experience it in some way or other.
So just sticking with that topic of sort of breaking through that glass ceiling, moving into a leadership position, some of the things you touched on in your talk and just now, in fact, were sort of horizon scanning, sort of being prepared to change, being prepared to jump potentially, twinning that with a formal management qualification, upskilling in that area. You also talked about networks such as this, and the network that you've drawn on across your career, and even sort of in a more professional capacity, executive coaching, essentially that can be really helpful. In terms of those key leadership skills that you think are really essential to planners, what are planners sort of, what do they need, what do they require? One of our audience members sort of flagged that, you know, leadership skills are often reported as being lacking in planning. You might want to comment if you on whether you agree with that, but what are those leadership and management skills that you think are needed to optimize your career?
I don't think planning is unique in that. I think they're right, but I don't think it's unique. It's something that's unique to planning. I think there are part of the issue that we have is a definition of leadership, and you know, I mean, we see this, you know, at all levels in politics and various other things. A lot of people still think of leadership as being something where, you know, you go in and you bulldoze your way through, and you're not worried about the wreckage you leave behind you. And yet there are managers and leaders out there who do that, but I question how effective they are in delivering good management and good leadership. For me, leadership is really about how you work with your people. Bear in mind, as a manager, you're managing for basic things, you know, your resources, your people, the information, the systems. But the biggest one of those, the most expensive one of those, is the people. That'll be the biggest line in your budget, wherever you're working. And so you really need to be giving that the biggest chunk of your time. And in that respect, it is about talking to people, understanding their career progress, using your organizational power to unblock channels for those people. And I'm personally convinced that if people would genuinely providing leadership, opportunities to break through that glass ceiling will be much more frequent than they are now. And using the same metaphor, I don't think the glass ceiling would be quite half as thick as it is now.
Again, just reflecting on your talk and reflecting on where those opportunities came, or more likely. You've worked now across the public and the private private sector. What sector do you think has afforded you the most opportunity for development?
Wow. I think both sectors have offered me different things, and I think to an extent that's a function of where I came into those sectors. The public sector was where I launched my planning career. It's where I did all the basics, learnt the basics, and got lots of experience and lots of different things, and basically put all the building blocks in place that allowed me to go on and do lots of other things. Working in the private sector has been fascinating because I've done so many different things and things that I would never have even imagined I was going to be doing. I've worked in different parts of the country. I've worked on organizational projects. I've worked on IT projects. I remember one assignment where I was going around the country evangelizing on bringing IT into planning departments and building control services. I worked with the planning inspectorate, talking to them around resourcing for what was then the new examination process for development plans. And so these were just things that I would never have imagined I would have been involved with. I think working in the private sector made me realise that there are lots of things that go into planning and the background of planning, if you like. Yeah. That in the public sector, we just know that we just got to do them. But the work in the private sector, I had the opportunity to actually get underneath what a lot of these things were all about, what they were intended to achieve, the thinking that went behind them, and really to then how that then applies in practice, and then the critical thinking. Well, is the way we're doing it actually achieving what we set out to do? And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, no, it isn't.
So some different learning experiences, but valuable experiences, it sounds like, across both sectors. I won't go back into sort of political interview mode, as Helen threatened at the beginning, and force you into a yes and no answer there. I'd like to sort of open up some questions to our audience. I'm sure they have lots of questions. If you have got any questions, you can raise a hand and one of the team will come to you, or pop it in the chat box. But just a sort of final question for me, and I was kind of, we didn't really get a chance to drill into some of those projects that you've been involved in, and I know that you've been involved in some very major projects across the country. I don't want to talk about Spurs. I'm an Arsenal fan. So it's always a bit difficult. But let's take the Spurs project, the stadium project. So when you've got these projects of this sort of scale over quite a long time frame, maybe a bit more of a specific question there. How do you bring all of those stakeholders together to drive forward that kind of regeneration project?
I think it's to be honest, a lot of what we do in planning, and I don't mean this in any sort of pejorative sense, is actually repetitive. And what you're doing is looking at some of the things that you probably did in your first couple of years in planning, but just and you're just scaling them to the circumstances and the size of the project. One thing that I think that I've learned through major projects, though, is that they actually do lend themselves to a project management approach, and it's something that I came through almost by accident. When we started, the PPA regime was first started being talked about. And it just struck me that that there was a lot of similarities in that, or potential in the PPA regime. Went to things that are done through standard project management processes like Prince 2 and all its variants. And I think that's been the thing that's really struck home to me. And so with major projects, I think the issue is about making sure that you properly understood what you're looking to do. You understand your communications channels, your the resources, the timeline that you're working to, and that you start and you maintain a momentum. And I think that for me has been the real sort of revelation, and that's what I would always be looking at in major projects. And I think it also works insofar as interim managers, we're only looking at a small slice of a project that could be sort of many years. And it means that for anybody who has to follow on, if you've got a project management framework, they know where they fit in, they know where you've got to, and they're not having to make things up and unpick things and start all over again. And you can keep the momentum, and you can work well towards and guarantee the delivery.
So having that structure, having that project management framework in place, perhaps just very briefly, you've got stakeholders that are on completely different pages. What do you do? 30 seconds, Ransford.
That is a tricky one, because you do have that. I think it's also about understanding where they're coming from. It's also, and I think that there is a big role in the lot of the projects that I've been involved in the public sector. There's a big role there for political leadership as well, because the last thing you want is to get a project all lined up. You've got your resources set up. You've got good communications with your with the developer. You know what you're doing, and then suddenly the council changes its mind. For me, there's nothing more frustrating than that. I do accept that for exactly those reasons you're saying, it's difficult politically to deliver these sorts of projects, and inevitably you're going to upset somebody. You can't do it without and get everybody. Well, I don't think you can. I'm the manager. Without upsetting somebody, and you need to have. Well, I think all parties need the confidence that people are not going to lose faith in it. Yes, you need to respond to changing circumstances, but people are not going to lose faith in it. They're not going to drop it because it starts getting a bit difficult. But that you're going to face up to the difficulties and be honest with people. And if you can't resolve their concerns, you tell them you can't resolve them.
So really about that honesty. I think there's a really great question here in the chat from Courtney Wood. Thank you, Courtney. Which sort of just as you said, honesty there. And this question is: have your personal convictions or values, including diversity and community, impacted your work in planning?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I really like the fact that I mean, I came into planning, if you like, from a social equity point of view, because when you've been in planning for any period of time, you realise that there are winners and losers, and one of my concerns has always been that quite often the losers don't need to be losers, and you can walk into the system without properly understanding it, and effectively you don't get what you want because you ask the wrong questions, or you direct them to the wrong people, or even or your timing might be wrong. And I think that's one of the things that my experience has taught me, that actually there's a great thing about being able to advise communities, applicants, whoever, to give them that information, to help them to enter the system in the right way, so they can have a reasonable prospect of getting what they want and what they need out of it. So I really enjoy working with community groups and helping them to go through the process. You know, I've worked with church groups and community groups. I'm working with the African Caribbean Centre in Haringey at the moment, helping them to deliver a new building effectively as a planning game back through the development of their site overall for housing. I have a retained position with a housing association, and over the last probably about 4 years, we delivered about more than 500 units of affordable housing. I get a lot of satisfaction out of that, it feels like, you know, you're really making a difference. So yeah, I mean, I think there is a role that in planning, which is about evening up. Oh, I was going to say leveling up, but that sounds, I think somebody's used that phrase before.
That's really helpful. So again, you touched on this right at the beginning. We're in I guess we're always in interesting times, but we're in very interesting times at the moment. So we're in the middle of this sort of once in 100-year sort of global pandemic. I don't even know what the question is really. But you know, how do you think this sort of the circumstances we're in now will impact on planning and planners?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I mean, obviously, it's already impacting on us. I mean, the fact that we're having this sort of dialogue tonight. I mean, you know, sort of 7 months ago, there's no way we'd have been doing this. And in some respects, I'm quite glad that probably that means the end of you know, sort of consultation events in drafty church halls with angry crowds sort of baying at you and things like that. So I think what it's showing us is there are different ways of delivering the service. I think the potential of IT is starting to be realised in almost like a, I don't know, plan tech 2.0 maybe. This is the next stage of how we introduce IT into the planning processes, and how we can use it effectively in terms of access to service, maybe somehow making it more, bringing more democracy into the process, increasing opportunities for participation. None of those are without challenges, but I think for me, that feels like the next step. And what COVID has done is it's given us the impetus to say, well, actually, we need to address those issues. I think a lot of these post-COVID, the things that work, I don't think will go back. And well, I hope we don't go back, and they will develop their own momentum. It's difficult to see, to project where IT takes us. It's one of those things you just sort of jump on the train and, you know, see where we end up. But I think that's an exciting prospect that it presents to us.
Yeah,
maybe positive coming out of COVID.
And quite away from that one computer. Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that sort of the digitization of planning being quite a cool part of the emerging white paper proposals threaded all the way through that document. Having had a chance to sort of read and digest the proposals, what are your thoughts on where we're going potentially?
Where we're going.
Yeah.
I think of planning as being, or the planning process as being, I mean, I accept that it's in need of reform. It always strikes me as being a bit like like a boat that sort of over the years it's had all these barnacles applied to its to the hull, and the petrol has been watered down a bit as well. So you haven't got enough power in it, and it just feels to me that what I was looking for from the white paper was something that's going to clear away a load of those barnacles that slows down the system, give some petrol, some resources to allow the system to really motor and start delivering. And I can see elements of that, but not enough of it. And I think that it starts off with the planning system isn't delivering enough houses. Exactly how many houses have been delivered in planning terms, but simply haven't been delivered by the building industry. And yet the white paper says nothing about the building industry. So I think there are some good things there. The potential is there. I'm a little bit disappointed by the specifics that being proposed, although the IT definitely is encouraging. And I think it's good that they're also trying to grasp the nettle of housing numbers. But I think that's going to be, I mean, it'd be fascinating how that pans out, because I feel it's probably one of the trickiest issues that the system has to address, both at our operational level, but also for our politicians who have to deliver the system. It's going to be that's going to be quite difficult. So I'm not sure how they're going to be able to square that away. I hope it's not going to be a fudge, but who knows? And we need to see which of the three categories we're going to be in, because I'm looking around my house and thinking, I don't know what I would put it in, and my area. I know which group I'd like to be in, and I think most of us do, but I'm assuming that that's just not going to be the reality. So I'm fascinated to see how that one will pan out.
Yeah, thinking there, of course, of the growth, renewal, protection categories, which I think I sit in all three. It feels like at the moment in my spot of London. I think you're just about to touch on this, but I'll raise it because there's really interesting reflection that's come from the chat there around sort of IT potentially having a role in attracting more people to participating in planning, to kind of the sort of the democratic dimension. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it definitely does, and I think again, another thing that has come out, not necessarily out of COVID, probably it was on its way, but planning is now a 24-hour operation. You know, why should you have to sort of wait for the office to open to send your comments in and things like that? IT gives us that ability to do things in our own time, and you know, again, it's something that we as a profession have to wake up to. The fact that somebody can, you know, buy a skirt online at 2 o'clock in the morning, why shouldn't you be able to put your planning application in at that time, or get planning advice at that time? You know, it's so I think that there is something there about access. Potentially there is democratization, but I do have some concerns about some people being able to access the full extent. I live in an area, for instance, where my broadband speeds aren't particularly good. So for things like this, I have to come to the office. I can't do it from home. It's not an option. So, and I think there's a lot of people in this country who are still in that position. So I think perhaps we do need to make sure that we get the infrastructure right before we commit 100% to digital by default. As I said, years ago, I was sort of evangelizing for IT around the country. And one of the things that we were saying to people back then is that we're not looking to close down any channels of access. What we're doing is to give you other options. Well, we've moved a long way since there, and I think realistically we are going to have to start closing down some of those channels, because in a sense they're actually getting in the way. What we need to be doing is really embracing with the potential that IT can give us, and just making sure that we're able to cover all those other areas, those peripheral bits, and we've got the infrastructure to make it a realistic proposition for everybody.
So I know Helen's encouraging some of those questions to come. Do put them in the chat box there. So you talked about sort of 24-hour planning system, and one of the things I've observed just during this time of sort of being in lockdown is suddenly my work is in my living room, and so the sort of, I don't know if that's the sort of motivation behind the comment there from Angela about sort of that need for a work-life balance in this new way that we're working. I think you talked earlier about sort of well-being and mental health. Maybe do you have any thoughts both in terms of where we are right now, as in sort of in this, I don't want to say we're sort of in the middle of this pandemic still, but just more generally in terms of how you've managed the work-life balance. Any thoughts on that?
It's a tricky one, this, because I you know, as you say, there is that danger, or not say danger, but it's a feature now that the boundaries between your work and your home have been completely eroded now. But I think that although that's a concern, it's also an opportunity, because it means that we've also got more control in how we then divide up our day. If you want to take some time out to go and walk your dog, take kids to school, or sit in your pajamas or whatever, those are things that are now available. We've now got, for some of us, probably 2 hours back in our day because we don't have to commute anymore. So there's lots of things there that I think can potentially help to ease that pressure that we're now facing, that actually the work is pushing its way into our private lives. I think we have to maintain a balance. I think that my observation that in recent years, the pace in local government is punishing, and I really sympathise for people who work in it full time, because it's just relentless. I'm fortunate that I'm able to work as a private consultant, as an interim manager, which gives me the ability to, if I'm looking at a job that I think is going to overload me, I can just say, no, sorry, you'll have to find somebody else. I have that level of control. I don't know, maybe in future, all this home working, maybe that becomes an option that's available to all of us.
Interesting. So there's a really interesting question and comment from Shahid. Shahid, I don't know if you actually want to just switch on your camera or your microphone. Perhaps one of the team can help sort of up with unmuting you, because this is a really great question around sort of, again, going back to that public private sector. Are you around, Shahid?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, no, just asking a question as someone who's worked both in the public and private sector. I can see I guess the barriers that people have got who work at each of those. And they're really interesting how people got stereotypes of people in the public sector got stereotyped people in the private sector and vice versa. I think one good way of breaking it down, that barrier, is potentially secondments of people in the private sector to public sector and vice versa.
Yeah.
I just couldn't understand what your thoughts were on such an initiative, but I think it would certainly be helpful to do that. So I hope that makes sense.
It does, yeah. So that sort of getting exposure to both public and private sector rather than staying on one track, and the potential benefits of that.
Totally. I see this as people who, I see this as someone who works at JLL, and the amount of people in my company who worked in never been to public sector.
Yeah.
Equally, the amount of my friends in the public sector have never been to the private sector, and it's just really interesting the difference in opinion each have got, and guess the transferable skills that potentially could be beneficial should they move to each one. Yeah. So do a secondment to another sector. But yeah, just a question.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Ransford?
Yeah, that sounds like a perfectly reasonable and what will be a really good move. I think I can only go by my own experience. I have to say that my experience of private sector working is slightly removed from probably those who work for like West End private sector firms, because I am me. This is my this is it. But I do work a lot with larger consultancies, and it's fascinating to see how they work. What are the drivers? The skills, in addition to technical planning skills that they work to, and I do think that certainly from a long experience of working in local government, I think that a lot of local government planners would benefit from exposure to some of those issues. I think it's one of the things that always that can be a frustration, that actually when planners as regulators make requirements from developers, sometimes we have no idea of what the implications of those are for those developers back at the ranch, and also for the other consultants who are having to advise. So I think there is potential for a lot of benefits in that sort of cross fertilization between the two sectors, because I think each one has different things that it can teach people, and I think the profession as a whole would benefit from that being a much more regular occurrence.
Thank you, Ransford. Got a few more questions in the chat box. I'd just like to invite Usman. If you're here, you feel comfortable, if you want to switch on your mic.
My question is basically, have you ever been subjected to racism in the workplace? And do you think there's enough awareness of how this affects our mental health in the workplace?
Yeah.
Thank you, Usman. Yeah, it's good. A good question.
Yeah. Have I been? Yes. I mean, it's just a matter. I think it's almost inevitable that at the time when I started in planning, the limited exposure of Black planners in the profession, there was prejudice around, and you know, it's. I think it really takes the form, the really direct, in your front sort of stereotypical form, and actually you're looking at much more shall we say covert sort of approaches, undermining of your position, sometimes in very public venues, in a way that makes it difficult for you to challenge, and at the same time maintain your credibility and your what do we say, and your composure, for want of a better phrase. Even, you know, recently I've had occasion where I've had to pull a councillor up over something that they said, and just really to ask them to reflect on what they said and what the actual meaning of what they said, because the usual response is, "Oh, I didn't mean any offence." Well, I was offended by it, and I think if that person that you were talking about heard it, I know that they would be offended by it. So yes, I have experienced it in different forms, and I've experienced it in difficult forms as well, making it difficult to challenge. I'd like to say that I think it's there's less of it about, but I'm not actually convinced of that. It may be that I just don't. I'm not in those sorts of environments where I'm going to be experiencing it to the same extent. I think one of the things that occurred to me the other day was that actually, when you become acquire senior positions, you have a certain amount of organisational power, and that means that people are actually on their best behaviour when they're with you. I suspect that people who haven't got that organisational power are probably still experiencing the same things that that I had when I was starting out, and in probably the same ways, and in probably just about the same sort of frequency.
It's a real challenge. One of the things I took from your took loads from your talk. Thank you, Usman, for that question. Was just where you started to talk about reflecting on your value and kind of your own value, and just holding on to and recognizing that even when some of these circumstances arise. Yeah, well, I'm sure this is a sort of issue we'll come back to as we go through these events and future events, and perhaps in the networking a bit later. I do want to come on to the next question from S. Patel. If you want to switch your audio or your camera on, if you feel comfortable with. This is a great question, and I had a significant birthday earlier in the year, so I'm like peak midlife crisis Ransford. So I'm really in for the answer to this. So I'll just invite the if the questioner is still here.
Hi, it's Samruti.
Oh, hi Sam.
My question is really sort of, as you've sort of moved up the career ladder, have you sort of felt that you've sort of broken through the glass ceiling and then sort of just thought to yourself, what next? And if so, how did you find sort of your direction in terms of where to go next?
A great question, Samruti. Over to you, Ransford.
Right. You know, in some respects, I think I have to be honest and say that actually I think that what I've done, I've actually sidestepped the glass ceiling, because working the way I do, I can pick and choose the assignments that I want to do, and so I'm not looking to progress in an organisation. I've got my own organisation, and again, reflecting on that, I just wonder how many of us have actually taken that as a route. Rather than having to address it on a day-to-day basis, we decided, well, actually, we can take back control in different ways, and or sidestep the issue. So that's something that maybe other people will have a view on, because I do wonder how many people have actually taken themselves out of the fray. And we're working in different ways, partly as a response to the issues that we face.
Perhaps if I just may ask a follow-up, Ransford, so just following from Samruti's question. So how did you work out that, you know, you talked about, was it you speaking to an executive coach, and was that a big part of like where you decided, actually, I'm going to take this route?
Yeah, I mean, when I started talking to the executive coach, I was really quite one-dimensional. I'd come out of local government. I just wanted to start feeling better about myself and just get a route back into it again. And he was the one who said to me, well, actually, you do realise that maybe as many as 80% of jobs never get advertised. And I just wouldn't accept it. I thought that was absolute nonsense. And as I said, then suddenly people started ringing me up about these jobs and assignments. And suddenly I thought, well, actually, maybe he's onto something here. Now, those sorts of jobs appear through all sorts of routes, and a lot of it is about the contacts and the networks that you have. And I don't think that I would when I go forward for one of these positions, people don't ask you, you know, sort of on your application forms what your ethnic origin is, but I think my reputation goes before me, and people are aware that I'm a black candidate, and it's difficult to know to what extent that shapes their decision, because it's an informal route. And again, I asked the question that not so much in terms of these type of assignments that I do, but informal routes to recruitment are becoming much more normalized. And I do wonder if that actually works against our interest, particularly if we're not the people who are making those decisions about hiring.
It's an interesting thought there. Cordella, so returning to sort of digital and IT, we've got a couple of questions there. Do you want to switch on your mic and camera if you wish to? Is that Cordella? Hi.
Hi, I didn't plan to.
Okay, welcome.
Hi, I'm Ransford's sister.
Oh, hello. Well, especially warm welcome then.
And it is taking the conversation back, but it was you made a reference to people putting applications in at 2 o'clock in the morning which I think is fine, but from a professional aspect and in terms of, again, the work-life balance, which I think is very important, particularly in terms of mental health and this online, being online all the time, is whether or not, in terms of access to advice, is really necessary, and whether we should perhaps resist too much encroachment and let the public sort of manage expectations rather than giving in so easily.
Yeah.
A good question.
It is, yeah. It's my sister telling me off again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I no, it's a good point, because it is a force that's already with us, and it's accelerating, probably even before COVID. I think 24-hour access is an absolute given. We've got that pretty much now anyway. Being able to respond, I think it kind of comes up against the elements of control that we also have. So actually, if I want absolute control, I may actually quite like to work at 2 o'clock in the morning and deal with all my stuff then. But I also want the ability to say, well, actually, no, I've shut down my computer. You can't get to me until 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock, or whatever it is that we work to. So I think I take the point, absolutely. But I think the issue, it needs to be balanced against this whole thing about the control that potentially IT gives us to be able to say, and we can set our own boundaries for where we strike that balance. I think the other thing that goes with that is that for a long time, people who wanted to work from home for all sorts of reasons came up against resistance from managers. And there was a lot of mistrust about working from home. But one of the things that this COVID crisis has proved to us is that actually people can be very, very efficient at home, possibly even super efficient at home, when they have control. And so you can put in the hours, you can work more effectively, you can get fewer distractions, and managers are actually having to sort of relinquish that control and replace it with trust. And I think that's a good thing.
So boundaries, but on the other side, a degree of trust. I'm going to have to wrap up soon and hand back to Helen, who I know has got some comments. I just wonder if we could take a very quick question from Morgan. Is Morgan still here? Do you want to switch on this final question from Morgan?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Morgan.
Oh, sorry, wait. Maybe it doesn't work.
That's okay. We can hear you loud and clear. So if you'd like to ask your question.
Can you hear me? Sorry?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? I'm just graduated from the university, and then I was doing a project. My dissertation's about neighborhood planning. So I have used some people, like someone from the neighborhood planning, they're quite welcome to the reform. But some people, like my tutors from the university, they will feel like the significance or the power of planners or planning activities have been weaker. So what do you see, like, because the people that have such a diverse ideas to the reforms, and do you think that's in general, is that a positive move, or a more controversial? Yes. And the second one is, as a graduate, what preparation should we do, to such a dramatic change? Because basically the things we've learned maybe not applicable to the coming planning process, the coming system. So what do you think about the preparations?
Thank you, Morgan. So I'll ask you to be quite brief, Ransford, in response to that. So any future role for planners, and how do planning graduates, I'm being a bit facetious there, but how do planning graduates prepare for this potentially quite revolutionary change?
I think it's still to be decided, frankly. The white paper is a good starting point, but by throwing all these ideas up. My slight concern is that the ideas, the specific things that have been thrown up, aren't necessarily addressing the key issues that we have in planning. But we will need to see how those actually properly shaped and how they emerge from the debate. My concern is I think it's using the boat analogy, I think it's just going to be much more barnacles on top of the barnacles we've already got.
So barnacles on the barnacles. Perhaps if I could shift you to a slightly more positive note, just to close on, and I'm keen to hand over to Helen. But just sticking with that, building on Morgan's question. So, you know, what advice would you be giving to your younger self, or just reflecting on planners who are sort of just entering the profession now? What one piece of advice would you give?
I would say that. I mean, I've said before, I think planning is a brilliant profession. I've had a love-hate relationship with it, to be honest. But being able to sit back and look over the last 30 years, it's been absolutely superb. I think the key for me has been, you know, that you can have access to a range of experiences as long as you're open and you're questioning, you're taking advantage of your networks, you're talking to more experienced staff. It's amazing the places planning can take you. A lot of the stuff is, as I say, is repetitive, but it's scalable, and it will take you to some place that you couldn't imagine. I ended up. This thought occurred to me when I was at Marwell Zoo on a site visit in a giraffe enclosure, and I thought, how on earth did I end up here? But it was brilliant to be there. And I'm not sure there are many professions that give you that option.
Well, thank you, Ransford. That was really wonderful, insightful, informative, and I could choose many other words. And thank you very much to Cordella's, Randall's sister, for giving you that book. Over to Helen.
Thank you.
All right, thanks very much for that very, very insightful session. I've learned a lot, you know, even though I've been in the profession for 3 decades, so thanks very much. And I think Sara did a fantastic job. You know, I could see that she tried not to ask you very difficult questions, such as what's your view about COVID, but she did try, and then she asked you. I haven't seen you, you know, being socially distanced, but as you are alone in your office, that's apparent. I'd just like to say a very big thank you to you once more for taking the time out to speak to us today. I liked, you know, the way that you've wrapped up in terms of talking about the range of opportunities. And there's quite a few things I wanted to just bring out. You know, you talked about the fact that, you know, having a monoculture organization should not be the given. And I think that's a message we should all take back to our different organizations where we work, either private or public sector, that having a monoculture isn't the way forward, because we are working in a multicultural environment, and that needs to be reflected in all our organizations. Another thing which, you know, I would like to also draw out is the fact that we all know and we all accept that change is the only constant in life. And it's even more so in planning. We are going through another wave of change right now, and we don't know where it's going to lead us. As soon as we are trying to bed down one change, another change happens. And so Ransford is encouraging us as planners that since we all know this is constant, we should anticipate change. Change is going to happen. Change is coming. So we should anticipate change. We should adapt, and we should move over. You know, I progressed in my career by moving. You know, I didn't stay in one job. Just like Ransford, I took management seriously, and I trained. I went for a master's in management, and that helped me to secure management positions. As Ransford has stated, make yourself distinctive. Do something that sets you apart. Most importantly, it talked about personal value, which was also touched upon by Sara when she was wrapping up. Knowing your personal value, knowing your worth, knowing that any organization that you go into, you have value to add, and that should always drive you. I spoke about value when we met in September. That's always my watchword. Always think about what value can you bring to the table. Well, I can't talk about mental health enough. Ransford stressed that. And if you don't take anything away tonight, take that away. Your mental health matters. I've often said to people, there is a thin line between insanity and sanity. And if you're not careful, it's very easy to just flip from being 1 minute being old and the next, and then not being well. So it's important that we take our well-being. I would just like to, close this session on one note, and then I'll talk about some of the things that we've got planned. Ransford talked about applying knowledge, talking and listening. A lot of us do more talking than listening, but I think we need to take on board the listening, and we need to listen to one another. And those who are managers in our midst, please take time. Take time to listen to those that you manage, and also reach out to all beings as much as possible. Before I give my closing comments, I wanted to chip something else in. I think one of the attendees asked a question about how do you make that transition. We are running a coaching program in November. It will be facilitated by Gatsby Sanderson. You can look them up. They are one of the top recruiters in the country. They only recruit to senior management position. That's going to be covered, even though we are aiming it at middle managers and senior managers. If you want to attend, please, all you have to do is join the BAME Planners Network, be a member, because it's going to only be open to members, and through that process, you'll be able to identify when to make the switch, when to move on. I'll probably share my experience at that particular coaching session. And my last closing remark on what Ransford said, I wanted to keep this for the last, and I'm still going to keep it for the last, but just to let you know that please, you can stay on if you want to just catch up, if you want to talk about yourself, just stay on. So we'll just stay open for another 10 minutes after 8 o'clock. So you can just chat, introduce yourself, and and put on your screen. One thing that Ransford said, and I really, really want us to take away, if nothing else, it says that you may be the first, but your aim should not be to be the last. You should hold the doors open for others. And that's why we are here as a network. We need to keep the doors open for others. Wherever you are, strive to be the best, not to be the last. Yeah. Ransford and others, they've paved the way. They've paved the way. And the only way we can pay them back or say thank you is to pave the way for others. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. In November, we've got 2 events, but the 2 events are primarily for our members. We've got one for coaching if you want to move into management position, and we've got one for graduates. And so we will let you know, and we have a socials coming up in December. So thank you for coming. And as I've said earlier, please do stay behind to interact with other people. And on a final note, can we just please turn on your microphones, and let's give a big round of applause to Ransford and Sara for a brilliant evening. Thank you very much.